The absolute worst way to study is rereading your notes or your textbook, because rereading is very passive. Studying requires you to think about the material that you're learning, and the best way to do this is for you to quiz yourself on it. However, the problem that most students face is that they don't have access to past papers. Not as many universities create some sort of Google Drive or some sort of database of all these past papers and past test papers, because, well, they reuse these past papers. As a result, if they are to give them to students, well, what's going to happen is that, well, we're all going to pass because we're all going to have access to these tests. So what can you do when you're faced with that dilemma? Well, the first thing you can do is you can go access my Google Drive, which is down below in the description box. I have somewhat created a whole collection of all my study notes, all the past papers that I have, pretty much all the nursing notes that I had, and I put it all down there in the Google Drive, so you can access that free of charge. You're welcome. However, the other problem you're going to face is that, well, if you're in the new nursing program, there's not that much material that is available as of yet because it's a new program. As a result, the main thing that you have to do right now is you need to create your own test questions. So in this video, I'm going to be covering how to create your own test questions, the process to go about it, and I'm going to be giving you a demonstration at the end of this video, so you don't want to miss it. So without wasting much time, let us get into it. So as I'm busy recording, this young brother of mine wants to be involved. So what's the first tip that we need to tell my audience?
Okay, so number one is organize your notes.
Okay, so when it comes to organizing notes, before you can even create study questions, is you need to make sure that all your notes are in order. You need to make sure that you know the main concepts that is going to be covered in the test, in the exam, because usually most topics, they'll give you a list of the main objectives or the outcomes of that topic. So you need to make sure that you sort of have some sort of list of that, because that will help you to determine how to create your questions. The second tip is you need to use your concept words or your defining words. And I know with most universities, if you look in your module guide, they'll give you a long list of the different words that they use and definitions. Examples of these words is evaluate, define, differentiate, compare, tabulate, etc. You need to be aware of these words because they're going to come up in your tests and your exams, and you need to be able to also use them when you're creating your own questions, so that when something similar to what you have created for yourself comes up, you know what that word means and you know how to answer that question, because each word requires you to be able to answer that question differently. Third tip to use when creating your own quiz is you need to use past tests, exams that you have. Sometimes even your lectures have questions at the end, whether that's in a textbook or a PowerPoint that they give you. You can use those same questions, or you can rephrase those questions, or use those questions as a guide on what type of questions that require you from this topic, and create your own, add or subtract from what you have. The fourth tip is you need to befriend your lecturers and your tutors. These are going to be your greatest help because they're the ones that set up the test. As a result, if you prepare your stuff in advance, you say, these are the questions that I have and this is my answer key. You take it to your tutor or to your lecturer, you befriend them, you are nice to them, you ask them politely, don't over frustrate them and don't overwhelm them. Give them 10 questions and say, sir, ma'am, this is the questions that I've created for myself for this topic. Can you just assist me? Does it cover enough for the questions that are going to be covered in this topic, etc.? Teachers and lecturers love to see students that make an effort. As a result, if they can see that, okay, this student really has made an effort, they'll be more than willing to ask you. So you can send it to them in advance over email, or in class. Most teachers will usually say email it to them. So just email it in advance and then ask them in class if they saw it, just to speed up the process, but don't rush them. Fifth thing is you need to mix up the type of questions that you're going to be asking yourself. You can have long questions, short questions, multiple choice, mix and match, tables, diagrams, mix and match, compare. You know how your tests are usually set up. Use that same format to just mix and match your stuff, so that you give yourself a broader way of answering certain questions, that whatever question comes into the test, you know how to answer it. And also you need to make sure that you listen in class, because most of the lecturers are really nice and they'll usually tell you that with this topic or with this certain part of a topic and this one, they can ask you to compare it. How do they compare it? Mix and match, differentiate, tabulate, compare, there's different ways that question can be answered. So you need to listen in class, because they will give you hints on how certain parts of your topics will be asked. The sixth thing is you can use a platform called Quizlet. You usually can type the topic that you want to create questions on, and there's usually other students that have created questions from that. And guess what? Your lecturers actually use some of those questions. So it's important that you go through those questions, you see the questions that are similar to what is covered in your lecture, and just use the questions that are there just to give you an idea of the type of questions that can be asked. The other thing you need to be aware of when creating these questions is you need to be very cognizant of how long a certain question is going to take for you to answer if you phrase it in a certain way. Some topics or some questions are going to require you to give a really long and broad answer. As a result, you need to be very aware of what words you're going to use, so that you're only either answering a specific part of that question or a certain aspect of a diagram and that sort of thing. So you need to be very aware of how big or how broad is this question going to be, and how can you simplify it. And the last and most important tip when you're creating questions for yourself is you need to think like a lecturer or like a teacher. As a teacher or as a lecturer, you're trying to find out how well do my students know this topic? Can they use this information in the real world when they become doctors, nurses, accountants, or whatever? So you need to think, as a lecturer, how is my student going to answer this question? Are they going to understand the question that I'm asking? Are they going to know which part of the topic that I'm going to be asking? How can I trick them? How can I make sure that they're using the intellect to answer the question? How am I making the student introspect what they've learned in a clinical, in a theoretical space, etc.? There's so many things that come into being a lecturer, so you need to put yourself in those shoes when you're creating your quiz. So those are all the tips that I can give you on the process of how to create your questions. But the last two things you need to do is you need to make sure that the questions that you write, they have an answer key, which is pretty much a memo of the questions that you've created. And you can take these answers to your lecturer to check them for you, or you can use your textbook, the internet, whatever, so that you make sure that you have the right memo. Because when you're doing these questions, you're not going to do it with the answers there. You're going to use the questions, answer them truthfully, closed book, and then you're going to mark yourself on those questions. And the questions that you got wrong, that's the topic that you need to focus the most. And these are questions that you don't create once and you leave them. You do them constantly over and over and over again until you're confident in your answers, and you can do it literally with your eyes closed. Because if you over prepare like that, trust me, your tests and your exams they'll be magnificent. So over here, I'm just going to be giving you guys a demonstration of how I would create questions for a human biology topic. So I'm going to show you the PowerPoint and how I would structure the questions and sort of the thought process that goes into it.
So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using lecture 21 of our human biology. I think this was first year, second semester, and it's about the control of respiration. So at this moment in time, when you're creating your questions, now you should have already gone through your notes at least twice, so that you have a full understanding of what the topic is about. Because when you're creating your topic, you need to know where the different parts in your topic link, because that will help you creating your questions. And you need to have a general and full understanding of what the topic is about, because that will help you to think of the type of questions that might be asked. Né? So one way you can set up these questions né, is you can have one page where you write all the questions, and then another page with all the answers. Another way you can do it, which I'm going to show you in this video, is you have question, then the answer, question, and then the answer. However, the downside with this is when you're studying, obviously you have to cover up your answer, etc. You can use the option, there is an app called Notion, where it allows you to write down all the questions, and then it's got like a toggle format where you can press on it, and then it shows you the answer, and then you can open and close the answer and stuff like that, as you can see here. But anyway, I'm digressing. So obviously you look at your lecture. So usually what I do is I will look at like usually the first and second slide, or slides that have the same information, and try to combine them in creating one answer. So for example, we see the area from which the nerve impulses are sent to the respiratory muscles is located bilaterally in the reticular formation of the brain stem, and it is referred as the respiratory center, which consists of so and so. So we can first see here that we've got a definition. So obviously the first question would be to keep it simple, and our first question is, what is the respiratory system? And then you write your answer, which is then it is an area made up of different neurons from which the nerve impulses are sent to the respiratory muscles. Okay, so then the next part is now telling you what the different the respiratory center is divided into. So that would be your second question. So if we move down, where is the respiratory center located? And then it tells you that it's located over here, which was the second part, bilaterally in the reticular formation of the brainstem. So you can start simple with your definitions and location of things and keep it simple now. Okay, then the next part, what are the three areas that make up the respiratory center? Which is now this part where it says these neurons are functionally divided into three areas, which is your rhythmicity center, apneustic center, and your pneumotaxic center. So obviously on the next slide, it tells you where it's located and what is its function. So you first answer what are the three areas. We've answered that. Then obviously the next question would be what are the functions and location of these respiratory areas, which would cover what is in slide 2. And what these questions that I've started with, most of these would be in your mix and match and your multiple choice. So these really won't be like your short answer questions. This would be more in your multiple choice and MCQ. Okay, and then what I really wanted to show you guys here is that you must mix up your questions. So with this question, you can mix and match the areas where your respiratory center neurons are found and also their functions, and then you can mix and match and choose it. Most of you would have seen this in your test where it shows you say for number 1 it can be 1A, 1F, 1C, etc, etc. Okay, and then in your slideshow, it then breaks up what your different neural respiratory center areas, what their function and what they do. So then you can break that up. So this type of question, for example, here your medullary rhythmicity area is now giving an explanation of how inspiration and expiration works. So this will most probably be your long question type of thing where you're explaining the whole process. So a type of question that you could ask is, describe the control of respiration by the rhythmicity area, and then you'd summarize what's in your PowerPoint into your own words. So I say this area controls both inspiratory and expiratory areas. So at the beginning of expiration, which is you're breathing out, the inspiratory area is inactive. That's basic. As you're breathing out, you're not breathing in. So as you're breathing out, inspiration is inactive, and as you're breathing in, expiration is inactive. Now, so then the expiration area is active for 3 seconds. Then after this, obviously, the inspiratory area becomes automatically active for 2 seconds and then relaxes again. And then for 3 seconds, you're breathing. So essentially, you're breathing out for 3 seconds and you're breathing in for 2 seconds. That's what this paragraph is saying in simple language. Okay, and then the apneustic and your pneumotaxic area, they're essentially doing the opposite function. So your apneustic area is the one that stimulates your inspiration and prolongs it while it's inhibiting your expiration, whereas your pneumotaxic area is the one that's inhibiting your inspiratory area so that your lungs don't become too full of air, so that you're not just breathing and you don't stop breathing in. So you guys literally need to think of this what do you call it, in a common sense sort of area, the same way that when you're blowing air into a balloon, if you keep blowing, it's going to pop eventually. So that's what the pneumotaxic area is trying to prevent, for you to have too much air, so they work in opposite. So for this part, you can do a comparison of the relationship between the apneustic and pneumotaxic area. Another great way to study this or to show this is you can do it in what do they call it, a feedback loop, where it's either it's put a positive feedback on the respiratory center or a negative feedback. So a positive feedback, it stimulates it, and the negative feedback would be to inhibit it. And then you can also even create like a diagram showing your medulla oblongata and its effects on the heart. So how your medulla rhythmicity area would affect the lungs, and then how your apneustic and pneumotaxic area would affect your lungs, and the opposite relationship with that. But anyway, that's a study tip. So yeah, that would be another way to do the question, making it a comparison. So they can either say compare, differentiate, analyze. That's one way to do it. No? All right, and then comes the control of respiration. So here it's talking about the different chemoreceptors that you have in your lungs, and these measure the composition of blood. This type of questions where it tells you like the location and its function, most of these is your multiple choice type of questions. I'm not going to cover a lot on that. And then this one, factors influencing the regulation of respiration. So then obviously now you're asking the question, okay, we've noted that we have these chemoreceptors. You've got your central chemoreceptors in the medulla, and then your peripheral chemoreceptors in your carotid and aortic bodies. So then how do these affect respiration? So that would be a long question. So on this type of question, the chemoreceptors can work when there's too much carbon dioxide in the blood or when there's too little. So these chemoreceptors mostly work on detecting the pressure of the carbon dioxide. That's the most important one, because we need a lot of oxygen inside our bodies, but too much carbon dioxide in our body, that's more harmful for us. So they could ask it as one question of how would these chemoreceptors affect respiration if you have too much and too little carbon dioxide in the body, or they can break it up and ask you either one. If there's too much, what would these chemoreceptors do, and if there's too little, what would these chemoreceptors do? This question is your Herring Brewer reflex. So your respiration, we've noted that it's affected by your chemoreceptors. We've noted that it's affected by your neurons right at the top here with your apneustic areas. And the last thing that affects your respiration is this Herringbrewer is, it's, what's the word? It affects the smooth muscles in your lungs. Obviously, your bronchioles and alveolus have got smooth muscle. So obviously, when this muscle is being stretched, it means that you are taking in too much air, and as a result, once that has been detected by your body, then it cuts off that so that you stop breathing in more. So it's the same thing that your apneustic area was doing to stop you from breathing in too much air, so that your lungs keep filling up without a stopping point. So most of these reflexes just stop you from breathing too much air, because like I said, with the balloon you would fill up and you would pop. I don't know if your lungs would pop, but it would definitely be uncomfortable if you kept on breathing in without breathing out. So that's pretty much my process of creating questions and study material for a different topic. You really need to rationalize it and think how the lecturer would think of, okay, these type of questions, where would I find them? Okay, this would be in a mix and match, this would be in a short form, this would be in a long form. And then also give yourself an idea of how many marks something would be, because if you know how many marks something would be, it also helps you to know how long your explanation needs to be. But I really hope this helps you guys in understanding how to create questions for any topic and the sort of the thought process that goes with it. So yeah.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this video.
Until next week, Friday, 12 p.m. South African time. Have an awesome one.
Bye guys.